They thought their troops were safe in Donetsk. After pushing deep into the oblast, Russian commanders apparently believed they'd tucked their headquarters and logistics far enough behind the lines that Ukrainian strikes couldn't touch them. Long-range drones? Sure, Ukraine had some, but Russia counted on air defenses and secrecy to keep command posts hidden inside civilian infrastructure. On the night of September 8th, Ukraine proved that thinking dead wrong. Multiple outlets, including Euromaidan Press and Militarny, drawing on OSINT from groups like Dnipro OSINT and Cyberbaroshno, say, Ukrainian forces struck a string of Russian command centers inside Donetsk. Among the confirmed hits, bases used by the Russian 41st Combined Arms, Army and elements of the 20th Motorized Rifle Division. The 41st's headquarters was reportedly inside the Donetsk Research Institute of Complex Automation. Both sites appear to have been heavily damaged or destroyed, but those weren't the only targets. Ukraine also hit the Topaz factory, a long-abandoned Soviet industrial complex that Russia repurposed early in the war as an army-level headquarters, warehouse and planning hub. Footage that circulated on social media and was later shared by outlets like the Kyiv Post and The Sun shows massive explosions, mushroom clouds, and raging fires at Topaz. Videos shot from apartment buildings show missiles streaking in and detonating with enough force to create distinct mushroom plumes, a clue that something more powerful than ordinary long-range drones was used. Military bloggers and reporters keyed into that clue. Kirilo Sazonov, a Ukrainian army officer and frequent commentator, called Topaz a priority target and said it was large enough to house warehouses, workshops, personnel, and possibly a high-ranking officer. If true, Ukraine may have not only demolished a key logistical hub but also eliminated important commanders. So what did Ukraine use? Early analysis from Euromaidan Press and the Kyiv Post points to the Peklo, colloquially called the Hell missile. Geolocated footage shows a fast, jet-like weapon diving into the Topaz site and detonating in a way that matches Peklo's profile. The Kyiv Post reported at least 5 Peklo strikes at Topaz, with multiple major explosions occurring in less than 30 seconds shortly after 1930 local time. If those numbers hold, this wasn't a lone test shot. It was a coordinated multi-missile volley. What is the Peklo? Reports from outlets like Defense Express and Militarny describe it as a new Ukrainian hybrid, part cruise missile, part loitering munition. More like a small jet than a quadcopter. It reportedly reaches speeds up to about 344 per hour and a similar range in miles, has inertial navigation with GPS correction, and may carry a warhead of up to roughly 50 kilos. Crucially, roughly 70% of its components are produced in Ukraine, making it largely domestically sourced, and easier to mass produce without depending on foreign suppliers. That combination, speed, range, and a domestically built production base helps explain how Ukraine was able to hit deep into occupied Donetsk. But it doesn't fully explain why Russian air defenses appear not to have stopped the strikes. Videos from the attacks show little to no evidence of anti-air interceptors or small arms fire trying to engage the incoming missiles. The only hint of a defensive response was scattered fire and a single missile trail above Donetsk after the strikes. Meanwhile, the Russian Ministry of Defense stayed notably silent about these specific hits, even while publishing reports claiming it had shot down drones elsewhere. In short, the footage, independent reporting, and Moscow's silence together make a persuasive case that Ukraine's strike succeeded. Why this matters goes beyond tonight's footage. Ukraine not only demonstrated it can reach far into occupied territory while getting past air defenses, it also showed precision. These were deliberate strikes on headquarters and command hubs, not random hits. That sends 2 messages to Russia. First, Ukraine's intelligence is good enough to locate bases Moscow thought secret. Second, Ukraine has the weapons and the will to take them out, and the timing could be strategic. Moscow is reportedly preparing a renewed fall, offensive in Donetsk after failing to meet summer objectives. Some outlets suggest Vladimir Putin still aims to capture Pokrovsk and push toward Kostiantynivka to collapse. Ukraine's fortress belt, the defensive line protecting the interior. Russia's summer gains were limited, even though it reportedly seized more territory in June-August 2025 than in the same months last year. Its costs were heavy, If Russia is planning another push this fall, functioning headquarters, logistics, and intact command networks in Donetsk will be essential. Decapitating those hubs now could blunt or complicate Russian plans. There's also an offensive opportunity for Ukraine. By destroying command nodes and supply sites, Ukraine creates gaps and confusion behind Russian forward lines, places where it might later exploit weaknesses and regain ground. Euromaidan Press argues this is exactly why Ukraine should keep taking out enemy bases and weaken occupier infrastructure ahead of its own counteractions. And the Ukrainians know the terrain. Donetsk city and its high ground matter. As analysts point out, holding the high ground gives better observation and fires, which is why control of cities like Donetsk and Pokrovsk matters so much for either side. This is not a one-night miracle. It follows a pattern. Over recent weeks, Ukraine has been ramping up domestic production of cruise and drone missiles. President Zelensky reportedly set ambitious targets for manufacturing thousands of missiles by year's end, a hedge against restrictions on Western long-range weapons and a way to ensure Ukraine can strike at will. The Peklo is part of that broader effort. Other projects, like the so-called Flamingo, a more powerful long-range missile slated for mass production in the winter, have been mentioned in reporting as well. If Ukraine can sustain production and employ these weapons in volume, the operational picture for Russian forces in occupied zones will become much more precarious. The message from September 8th is clear. Areas Russia thought safe in Donetsk are no longer inviolate. Command posts hidden among factories and research institutes can be found and hit. Russia may have to pull more resources into rear security and air defense, dispersing forces and complicating offensive preparations. Alternatively, continued Ukrainian strikes could create opportunities for counterattacks where the occupiers are weakest. For Russia, this is an expensive problem. Strengthening rear area defenses and hardening facilities costs materiel, time, and manpower, three resources Moscow doesn't have an infinite supply. For Ukraine, the cost is production capacity and the risk of escalation, but the potential gains are significant. Dismantle the enemy's ability to coordinate, and you blunt their offensives or create openings to retake ground. What happened in Donetsk on that September night is both a tactical success and a strategic signpost. It shows a maturing Ukrainian strike capability, accurate intelligence, domestically produced precision weapons, and a willingness to use them at scale. It undermines the assumption that Russian occupies can shelter vital command infrastructure behind civilian facades and layered air defenses, and it raises questions about how prepared Russia really is for another major push in the fall. The conflict will not relent. Russia's attempts to press its territorial gains may intensify as seasons turn, but costly mistakes, like failing to protect key command hubs, make any future offensive harder to organize and sustain. Ukraine's strikes in Donetsk have not only removed buildings and units, they have punctured a sense of safety, proving that nowhere in occupied Donetsk can be counted on as untouchable. If Ukraine keeps producing missiles and integrates them into a strategy of targeted, intelligence-driven strikes, it can both disrupt Russian operations and set conditions for counteroffensive actions. The Peklo demonstrated what a domestically developed, fast precision missile can do when used decisively. And if bigger systems like Flamingo enter mass production, the battlefield calculus will shift further. For viewers trying to read the next chapter, watch how both sides respond. Will Russia harden its rear areas and accept a slower, more entrenched campaign? Will Ukraine leverage these hits into a broader offensive that reclaims lost terrain? The answer will depend on production, intelligence, and the willingness to use these tools when it counts. September 8th was a reminder. In modern war, secrecy and distance are no guarantee of safety, and a smartly produced missile, launched in numbers with precise targeting, can rewrite plans overnight. She